questions?
Now I have a microphone. I wanted to ask you if you've used any of these methods in your job and how your experience was like.
Yes, I have used them all. That's why I talked about them. The ones that I haven't used, I didn't say, I guess, anything. Yeah, I think that, for example, pasta, it's a good way into kind of a structure how you want to work and to provide context for the model that you are creating. Because if you start, for example, with just an attack tree, as I said, it can branch out quite easily. And if you don't have a context, if you don't know exactly what is your objective, then you can easily get lost. So I think that pasta, it's good to provide that type of a structure and actually telling you, like, we are defining this as the scope and we are just looking at this. Sure. Yeah, Aka?
So if you have in your organization developers and you want these developers to do the threat modeling for them, like for their own services, like which method do you think will suit the ones that don't have a security background?
Well, I think it's good if they can have some security person that will kind of lead the way. But no, I think they can start with the evil user stories and also with the attack trees, because I think that they will really have the knowledge of, like, what are the things that I don't want to happen with this feature. That maybe also with the attack trees, they can think about like the different consequences. Probably, I mean, I don't know if the developers will be helped by the architects, but also like the architecture review could help them. It really depends on like their background and how much do they know about the system. If they just know some parts of the whole system, maybe don't take them to the whole architecture review, because that will just kind of conflict them.
And so if you like recommend the user stories for them, like how often do you suggest them to revisit them whenever they add like new feature, or like do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I think that that once you create the first like threat model, the times that you have to iterate and kind of update it, it's whenever there are like significant changes. If you are introducing a new feature, then it's good to look at the feature and see, like, would this bring or introduce new threats? Do I actually need requirements for this? And at that point, you will update your threat model.
I kind of had the same question about the architecture review because, as you said, diagrams, they're made at the beginning and sometimes they're not maintained.
Mm-hmm.
So how often do you have the experience of doing a full architecture review of a system?
I think that in my experience, it has been like done once, like the full review, and then or if, yeah, I think that once for the whole thing, because it has been cases where the systems are very complex, and then you take actual pieces of it and start with that, and then go with the next and the next. So I don't think that there was cases where we actually went through the whole architecture for such complex systems. And for those that had a very good like threat model from the beginning, it was just about checking what has changed after it was created from the beginning.
Also, like, do you know, I know that there are automated tools, like especially if you have infrastructure as code, you could generate the architecture diagrams of sorts. Have you done reviews also on generated stuff? Is it different than doing an architecture review on things that are more manual?
Yeah, I think it is possible, but also like there has to be some grouping in ways in how you want to kind of manage the whole review. Because yeah, those type of diagrams can be quite complex and have a lot of things. And maybe you also need to check, like, is this really important or not? So I think that scoping at that point, it's important to do, like, before going into the modeling.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
So how do you work with developers and doing this threat modeling? Are you like in a team and continuously reviewing what they're doing, or are you coming in like once a year and telling them
Um,
what to?
Yeah, I was a consultant. So what I would do is my customers will want me to kind of run the threat models. So it was probably meeting them at planning some like workshops with them, and it was mostly about like whenever they felt like they kind of wanted this to run. For some customers that I had, we actually built like the threat modeling as one of the requirements for the software development lifecycle. So at time point, we created the first threat model, but then we kind of trained them into threat modeling and asked them, it was like a requirement, like if you are implementing something new, then you actually have to do the threat modeling. We kind of provided a list of things that were sensitive, that if you are making this change, then you actually have to really explore if this is introducing a threat or not. And then document and update the threat model accordingly.
Nice. And another question, you mentioned this pasta, but I didn't quite understand what the 7 steps are and what it's about.
Yeah, so it's first defining the objectives. So what do you want to accomplish with it? Then it's defining the technical scope. So how far do you want to go with it? Then the next one is it. Let me get back to that. Yeah, so it's the application, the composition. So actually, probably with this, as I mentioned, maybe the other methods can be used for this. So for the application, the composition, you could use the architecture review, so you can actually see the different parts of it. Then we have the threat analysis. So you will identify the threats from this application. Then you do the weakness and vulnerability analysis. So once you identify the threats, you will think like, do I actually have weaknesses that will kind of facilitate these threats from occurring? Then you do the attack model simulation. So could an attack actually occur in this? Would it be feasible or not? And then you have the risk analysis and management. So after the whole analysis, you will really analyze like what are your, the output will be what are the risks that are actually meaningful to you, that will represent an impact for your system, for your assets, and in the context of your business. And based on that, you will manage. So what that means is that you will decide, do you want to go ahead with this change or not? Or this feature or not? Do you want to avoid the risk and just decide to not implement it? Do you want to maybe implement some other controls that will mitigate somehow the threat? So that's the last part is really thinking about what is going to be your strategy towards mitigating whatever you have identified as threats.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Just wonder about the changes in the way we develop applications. I mean, all the techniques there, the threat modeling techniques, many of them are collaborative. They all require a certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think of the way, like things like development goals that organizations have, like where they want to be like, say, the Phoenix project or Unicorn project, where you've got, instead of having big applications that you build over a year, you've got people pushing out new microservices every day or several times a day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, since threat modeling is one of the most important tools that application security people have, do you feel there would be a place for threat modeling in that type of future?
Actually, I think that's why it's important to define what are like changes that actually have an impact. So you can kind of classify changes into something that if it's just a fix in the code and it's not really representative, or you know for sure that that's not kind of bringing a new threat, then that you can go with it without going through the whole threat modeling. But if it's a sensitive feature, if it's about like making bank transactions or something like that, I mean, that's like a big difference. but you have to define the criteria of what is like a sensible change, and then for those perform the threat model and update your threat model. Yeah, it's definitely not for every single change. So you need to make that differentiation.
Me again. Do you have experience with ways of kind of gamifying threat modeling? Like, have seen card decks where you can play with people and
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I can actually give you a link to one that I used to use in my previous job. Yeah, it was like, because thinking as an attacker, it's not easy, and then sometimes you don't know like what are the attacker's capabilities, and it's often the case that people will think externals are an attacker, but internals, they are never like an attacker. But we know that people make mistakes, and that is already a threat. And like the involving humans in any process, it's already a threat. So yeah, there is this card deck that has, we call it cyber boogies. So it has like these characters of, let's say, like an ex-employee, or just like a bypasser, or like actually somebody that it's probably from the mafia, or just a script kiddie. So in those cards, you will see like what could be their motives for attacking a system, what could be their capabilities, and just by looking at those things, you can already kind of open your mind to thinking like maybe with these capabilities and this motivation, this person could actually do this for my system. So yeah, I can provide the link after this.
So did you experience pushback from the developers, and when they were saying like, this threat isn't valid because we have like very low probability of potential attack happening? How did you like encounter this?
Yeah, definitely there was that. And that's why I think it's also important that it's not only developers who are in these workshops or creating the threat model, because you definitely need input like from different aspects. And if it's like, let's say, they wouldn't see it as something big, but if you actually explain to them, like, for example, with an attack tree, like you can see like how could this happen, so they can easily see that, okay, maybe this is a threat. Or if you kind of identify or map it to actual risks, then that's how they would see, okay, this is like something that it matters. But it's also like about from the business perspective, is this like, sometimes in security you will say this is a threat and this is bad, but then maybe the business decides that they can take the risk of that. But I think it's not really the decision of the developer to really say, yeah, this is something that it's risky or not. So I think it does require some assessment to decide and determine, okay, is this actually something that it's like a threat, and will the consequences be really bad, or will they be just minimum, and it's really not necessary to implement or to mitigate it in any way.
Thank you.
Yes, bringing back to the topic of releasing microservices often, could it be like, could you use integration tests that you structure and cover certain scenarios as a way to mitigate risk? Would that be a good solution?
Yeah, definitely.
we should have sat next to each other? It's not so much of a question, but maybe a comment on the microservices. I guess if you're or if your organization wants to create microservices on a production line kind of way where you deploy them as they come, you likely have templates. So that if you test the template for the microservices, then you're already covering a lot. So you can still do that, but in the template.
Yeah, you can have your baseline of like something that it's actually secured. and then deploy that.
So I actually also had a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any tips and tricks for getting teams to keep architecture diagrams in sync with like actual development environments as work continues to happen from the design phase?
Yeah, unfortunately, no, I don't have any tips to that. It's a struggle, and that's why I mentioned as something negative about it, because it's really about, I don't know if it's like a cultural thing or somebody that really it's works in a structured way and needs to have it so that they actually create it. I think most of the times I've been surprised when somebody actually shows a good architecture diagram, because most of the times it's not really the case. And me when I was a consultant and I was like going to these workshops and running them, one of the prerequisites was create an architecture diagram at least. I mean, it doesn't have to be probably too detailed, but at least have the main components and be sure to have like the important interfaces there, and also like the protocols and that type of thing. And it was also, we used to take the opportunity during those workshops to actually update the diagrams, because you will go through them and then they will identify, okay, so this is missing here. So they will actually update them at that point.
Thank you.
Actually, it's counterintuitive, but in my experience, you always end up with a worse threat modeling workshop results if people come along with prepared diagrams. The actual fact of sitting at a whiteboard or something and drawing those squiggly shapes seems to educate the team and involve the team in a much better way than if you just throw up a diagram with 60 components. You can just see everybody's brains switching off in real time.
A comment on that, we do something that is kind of fun called architecture golf, where we do kind of a round table thing. We've only done it digitally so far, where everyone has to draw something for 5 minutes and then it passes on to the next person. So even the people who are completely new and don't know the system, at least you talk about it and they're like, oh, probably there's an arrow here that communicates with this thing, and then people can help out. And I think that makes people more excited and learn more when they're interactive. That's a tip.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm not very well versed in this subject. But I was wondering, for these like independent computer systems, is there a habit to have some sort of like I don't know, blockchain technology to kind of trace back all the major changes that have been, like some sort of system to implement?
Not sure I fully understand the question. So what do you mean by independent system?
So if for a company and they have their system, is it common to have a system where you can trace back all the major changes that have been made to the system?
I think that really depends on the company. I'm not sure if it's common. It's definitely a common requirement, like to have like this rollback. But I actually don't know if it's that common or not.
No, I was just thinking it would be nice to implement like a blockchain technology, because then you could see exactly who changed what by their unique identification. Yeah, I don't know. This is not my area, so. Oh, okay. So you can see exactly the timeline of it. Oh, that's nice.
Maybe Aka can mention something about like infrastructure as a code, because it kind of facilitates that.
So, like when it comes to like building your like services, instead of like the infrastructure engineers like coming and like manually like adding like the new like services or creating new database, like what you want to do is to write all of them in like a Terraform code, and then like whenever there is like a change, instead of people like manually doing things and these being like unregistered, so you just have everything in a code. So whenever you want to trace back to any major change, there is like everything is in the code, and all the policies, they're also like written in the code. So this is like helping, like, so instead of people just, for example, giving access to some other engineers, instead they have it like in the like policies, or they have it like as a code. So that way you know who can access what and like what are the permissions.
A comment on that. When you have infrastructure as code, at some point you need to set up the base of the infrastructure as code. And often that is manually run because you need to have the thing that it uses to push the rest of the things.
Yeah, you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah.
So I guess we are done with the questions. So the next talk will be at 7:10 by Engla. Now we can have a break and mingle. Yeah, thank you very much.